Hello friends, I hope you all are doing well and staying safe at your own place. I, CA Pujin Kapadia, welcome you all on my today's lecture on the subject accountancy and taxation. As you all are well aware, today we are going to commence with a new chapter. The name of this particular chapter is Residential Status of an SSC. Yes, friends, in this chapter, we are basically going to find out whether an assessee, that is the person who is liable to pay tax, is a resident or a non-resident. So basically, we are going to study what is a residential status for different kind of person, for different category of person, and how the tax incidence, that is when the liability of the tax is going to be arise on the resident and how it is going to be arise on the non-resident. So starting with the first slide which is mentioned over here, introduction, that is why residential status, why it is important to study this particular topic. In the first point I have stated, tax incidence of an assessee depends on his residential status. Friends, basically tax incidence means when you are liable to pay tax. For example, I am an Indian citizen who is living in India. Now, if I'm having any property abroad, that is in foreign country, and if I'm earning that any income on that particular property, then whether that income is going to be taxable in my heads in India or not. So basically, tax incidence with, I mean that whether any income is going to be taxable as per my residential status or not. That is what we are going to study over here. So my main optimum objective is to study the tax incidence of an assessee. Like if I'm resident, then which all are the incomes which are going to be taxable to me in India, and which all are the incomes which are not taxable to me in India. Similarly, if I'm non-resident, then which all incomes are going to be taxable and which all incomes are not going to be taxable. So we are basically going to study this particular part. As a result of which, it becomes necessary, firstly, to determine that whether a person is resident or non-resident. So my optimum objective is to study the tax incidence, which basically means that whether that income is going to be taxable in my hands or not. But before that, I need to determine the residential status, that what is my residential status, because on the basis of that particular residential status, you can determine the incidence of the tax. Here I have given you the scenario, whether an income accrued to Indian individual outside India is taxable in India or not depends on his residential status. As I have told you just now, that suppose I am an Indian resident having property in foreign country, and if any income is becoming due or accrue at foreign, then whether that particular income is going to be taxable in my hands or not will be basically determined on the basis of my residential status. So friends, yes, citizenship is not important. What is important is residential status. So yes, there is a difference between citizenship and the residential status. So whenever I'm going to talk from the viewpoint of tax, my focus is not more on the citizenship, my more focus is going to be on the residential status. Similarly, in the third point I have written, whether an income earned by the foreign national in India is taxable in India or not depends on his residential status and not citizenship. Let's take an example. I hope you all are aware about IPL, that is Indian Premier League. Now there are many foreign players who are coming to play in India. Fine. Now in this particular case, they are the foreign citizen, but they are earning income in India. Fine. As a result of which, we need to determine whether that particular income is going to be taxable in India or not. So for that purpose also, I need to determine the residential status of that foreign player, because by that I am going to come to know whether he is liable to pay tax in India or not. So in crux, if I want to say, why is residential status necessary? Because by determining the residential status, we are going to come to know whether the person is liable to pay tax in India or not. That is our optimum purpose. So before studying the types of income, first of all, we need to understand the residential status. So whenever we are studying taxation, the first thing that we need to determine is what is the residential status of the assessee. Then after, we can go forward to study different heads of income, and then after determining the tax liability. So the primary phase at the time of studying taxation is the determination of residential status. Now friends, in the current scenario, income tax has passed the circular number 11 of 2020 dated May 8 2020 due to COVID-19 crisis. I would just like you to make you to the notice that as of now there is no information given from the end of university whether we need to adjust this particular circular or not. So as of now, during my course of teaching this particular lecture, I'm going to teach you ignoring this particular circular. If it comes into effect, we are going to deal it laterally, fine. So as of now, we are going to study in a normal scenario. That is, we are going to study what is directly being written in the act or in the law. We are as of now not taking into consideration this particular circular, reason being this is just for this particular pandemic situation. So we are going to study generally what is being written into law. In case if it is going to be applicable, then I will cover the same before your examination. So let's start. This slide basically talks about the classification of residential status as per the category of persons. So now we are going to start that how many kinds of residential status are there. As I have told you, either you can be the resident or you can be non-resident. Now in this, we need to study this classification. This classification is basically based on two aspects. What is the category of the person under which you are falling? Remember the definition of person we had studied in our basic concepts. Fine. So first of all, I have written over here type of person. If you are individual or HUF, then you are going to see your left hand side. And if you are anything else, that is either other than individual or HUF, that is if you are a firm, if you are a company, if you are AOP, BOI, etc., then you are going to see your right hand side. Now in both the case, the broad classification, the primary classification is resident and non-resident, as you can see in this particular chart. Fine. But now, if you are individual or you are HUF, then there is further classification of resident, that whether you are ordinary resident or you are not ordinary resident. So if it comes for 2 marks, state the classification of residential status. You need to remember, friends, that the classification of the residential status is being determined on the basis of category of person. That is, into which category of person you are falling. If you are individual or HUF, then you are having two subparts, that is residents and non-resident, and under resident you are having two types, ordinary resident and not ordinary resident. In case of any other, that is other than individual or HUF, I'm just having two broad classification, whether I can be resident or I can be non-resident. So at the time of studying the sums, we are going to have practical sums from this chapter also. So first of all, we are going to study the conditions, like if conditions are fulfilled, then you are resident or you are non-resident. So my primary criteria is to understand whether I'm resident or non-resident. If I'm non-resident, then I need to look forward. But if I'm resident, then I need to further study further extra additional conditions to determine whether I'm ordinary resident or not ordinary resident. So this is a rough idea like what we are going to study. So basically now the upcoming slides and the sums, practical sums that are being asked to you in examination is basically like determine the residential status of a particular assessee for the particular assessment year. So first of all, I need to identify whether that particular person is an individual or HUF or it is others. Generally, the sums which are being asked to you in examination pertains to individual, but this is generally. We need to learn from all the viewpoints so that if anything comes up in examination, we can easily deal with each and every category. But generally, the questions are being asked for the individual. Now, if I'm talking about individual, first of all, there are basic conditions that I need to study. If I will going to study the basic conditions, I can easily make out whether a person is falling as a resident or a non-resident. If he is a non-resident, then there is no further question to put the additional condition because there are no further subtypes. But if he is a resident, then I need to further apply additional conditions to determine whether he is ordinary resident or not ordinary resident. So primarily we determine resident versus non-resident, for which we are going to take care of basic conditions, and furthermore we are going to take care of additional conditions to determine ordinary resident and not ordinary resident. I would just like you to give you a moment, take a quick overview on this particular chart so that it is clear, like as per category of person, what is the classification of residential status. Well, I hope you are clear with this classification. Fine. So let's start with the chapter. The first slide that I have mentioned, all the slides that I have mentioned over here are going to be of utmost important because we are going to study in detail the conditions for determining the residential status. So in this particular slide, we are going to take care of basic conditions, that is to determine whether an assessee is a resident or a non-resident. As I have told you, this is our basic conditions. So before studying them, let's understand how we are going to implement these conditions. In the first point, I have written over here, if any one condition is satisfied, then the person is going to be said to be a resident. So this is the most important thing you need to remember. It is an or criteria. So basically we are having here two conditions. What are they? We are going to delete just now only. But before reading that particular conditions, just remember what is the criteria for determination of residential status. There are two conditions which are given over here. If any one of this condition is being fulfilled, that is either one or two, any one that I have written over here, if any one condition is satisfied, then that person is going to be said to be a resident. And if none of the two condition is satisfied, that is one is also being not satisfied and second is also not being satisfied, and in this particular case we will say that that particular person is a non-resident. So you need to remember like that. It is an or criteria, which means at least one condition should be fulfilled. If even one condition is satisfied, then the person is going to be termed as resident. But if none of the condition, that is not a single condition is being fulfilled, then he will be considered as a non-resident. Second important point we need to remember over here is day of leaving India and day of returning to India will be considered as stay in India. Now let's take an example. Suppose I am coming to India on 1st January 2020 and I am again going back to USA on 1st March 2020. Now here question arises that whether 1st January and 1st March are to be considered as my stay in India or as my stay in USA, because of course I would be having my flight on that particular day. So it is not the full time I would have spent in India, but just for ease of calculation, what the rules have said is the date of leaving and the day of returning back to India, both the days are going to be considered as the stay in India. So here I need to calculate the number of days including 1st January and 1st March 2020. I hope I'm clear with both the points that I have mentioned over here. So the first was how many conditions should be satisfied to be a resident? Any one. So if out of two conditions, any one condition is being fulfilled, then I can say I am the resident. If both the conditions are fulfilled, then also you are definitely the resident. But what is the minimum criteria? At least one condition should be fulfilled. Second point we have learned is day of leaving India. That is the day on which you are leaving India and the day on which you are returning to India are going to be considered, going to be added in your stay in India. So in my particular example, I was coming to India on 1st January 2020 and I was leaving back to USA on 1st March 2020. So 1st January and 1st March, both these days are also going to be considered as I was in India. I hope I'm clear with this. Okay, fine. Now let's take look to the main core part of this particular slide, that are the conditions. Now here you may feel sir ये तो बहुत छोटी सी conditions है, but actually when we are going to implement it, they are going to add on to certain mathematical issues like calculation part. So I would request you all to pay utmost good attention to what I am explaining to you as of now. Let's start with the first condition. In the first condition I have written he is in India in previous year. Now I guess you are now totally clear like what is previous year and what is assessment year. Previous year is your current financial year. So what I have written over here is, again I am reading the same, he is in India in previous year for 182 days or more. So the first criteria is talking that whenever I'm going to check the residential status of an assessee, I need to make sure that his stay in India is at least 182 days. He should be in India for 182 days or more in the current year, in the previous year. Fine. I hope I'm clear with this. So what we are supposed to do is we are supposed to calculate the number of days assessee has stayed in India. At the time of calculating his stay, we are also going to add the day on which he was leaving India and the day of which he was returning to India. As a result of which, what I'm going to do is in the current year, that is in the previous year, let's take year 2019-20, then I need to calculate that in the entire year 2019-20, for how many days my assessee was in India. If the number of days are at least 182, that is 182 days or more, then I would say my first condition is satisfied. If it is less than 182 days, 182 days से कम है, then I would say my first condition is not satisfied. So what is important, friends, over here? You need to calculate that in previous year, that is in current year, how many days has he taken a stay in India. If it is 182 days or more, first condition is satisfied. If it is less than 182 days, first condition is not satisfied. Okay, fine. Let's move to the second condition. Now in second condition, we are having 2 points that we need to calculate and consider. That is, I have just labeled it. It is not written in the rules, but for our easy understanding, I have just classified it into two, that is A and B. So basically we are going to study it that under condition number 2, we need to see two different conditions, that is A and B. Now let's read A condition. It is written, he is in India in previous year for 60 days or more. So what is my first criteria of second condition? That then assessee should be in India in my previous year, that is in my current year, for at least 60 days. If he is here for 60 days or more, then my A part is going to be fulfilled. I hope you are clear. So in first condition, I was checking his stay in India in the current year for 182 days. Now I'm checking his stay in India for 60 days for the current year. But additionally, I also need to consider the B point. So I have written over here and, that is at the time of second condition, I need to see that both point A and point B should be fulfilled to satisfy condition B. If any of this point is not fulfilled, we will say my condition B is, that is my condition 2 is not fulfilled. I hope I am clear. So what I have written over here, point A and point B, which basically means it is compulsory that A and B both should be fulfilled in order to satisfy condition 2. If any of this, that is either A or B, is not fulfilled, then we can say condition number 2 is not satisfied. Now let's look at the condition number 2. As I have told you, what was the A part? That then assessee should be in India in the previous year for 60 days or more. B part is he is in India for 365 days or more during 4 years immediately preceding the previous year. Let's read it once again so that you can get in clarity. What I have written over here, he is in India for 365 days or more during 4 years immediately preceding the previous year. So first of all, let's decode these words, immediately preceding the previous year. As I have told you, if I'm talking about the current year, previous year, 2019-20, then here I am going to talk about 4 years immediately preceding the previous year. That is 2019-20. We are not going to consider it. We are going to consider 4 years before it. So let's go back reversely. 2018-19, 2017-18, 2016-17, and 2015-16. So which are my 4 years as per this condition? 15-16, 16-17, 17-18, and 18-19, because 19-20 is my present year, that is current year, previous year. So I am not going to consider that. I am going to go back reverse for 4 years. So now what I want to check is from the year 2015-16 till the year 2018-19, if the assessee was in India for total of 365 days or more. So I hope you are clear with this. Now the time horizon that we are going to check is 4 years. In our case, in our example, it is from 1st April 2015 to 31st March 2019. Now in this span of 4 years, whether the total stay of assessee in India was 365 days or more or less. If it was 365 days or more, then I would say B part of second condition is being fulfilled. If it is less than 365 days, then I would say that B part is not fulfilled. So again, I am repeating both the parts. That is part A, under which we had studied that in current year, what is our current year? 2019-20. That is our previous year. Assessee should stay in India for 60 days or more. So in the period of that 1 year, he should be in India for 60 days or more. And at the same time, I need to also check the B part. That is previously, that is in previous 4 years. That is from 2015-16 to 2018-19. He should be in India in the span of this 4 years for at least 365 days. If it is tick, it is checked, then I would say that B part is also being fulfilled. If it is not checked, then we will say B part is not fulfilled. In short, what I need to remember over here is if both the conditions, that is A and B, are satisfied, because I have written over here and, which means A and B both should be satisfied. If both are tick, then I can say second condition is fulfilled. If any one of this is not satisfied, then we will say second condition is not fulfilled. So this is the basic table of basic conditions. And what we have learned, if any one of this condition is fulfilled, then that person will be considered as a resident. If none of this condition is fulfilled, then he will be classified as the non-resident. I hope I'm clear with this. Before going to the last part of this slide, I would just request you to go through all the 3 points so that you can get a proper idea what they have written over here. Please read it carefully, especially the box of conditions, because this is something on which our sums are going to be based. So I would request you to go through in a detailed manner from the box of basic condition. Well, I hope you are clear with this particular part. Fine. So what I have said till now on this particular slide, let's recap it quickly. First point I had explained you, if any one condition is satisfied, then the person is said to be resident. So here it is an or criteria that at least one condition should be fulfilled. And second thing that we have learned as a rule is the day on which I am leaving India and the day on which I am returning back to India, both these days are going to be considered as my stay in India. So these 2 points we are supposed to remember. Now, what are our conditions? That is an important point. First condition, that is first basic condition is I should be in India in the previous year for 182 days or more. So this is my first basic condition. If I am in India for at least 182 days, then my first condition is going to be fulfilled. And if anyone is being fulfilled, then I will say I am a resident. What is my second condition? Second condition is being further bifurcated into 2 parts, A and B. Under A part, it is written, he is in India in previous year for 60 days or more. So here, what I'm checking, that in previous year, my stay in India should be 60 days or more. And simultaneously, what is the B part? I'm in India for 365 days or more during 4 years immediately preceding the previous year. Like I've given you the example, if my previous year is 2019-20, then in B point, I'm not going to consider 2019-20. I'm going to go 4 years back from 2019-20. That is 15-16, 16-17, 17-18, and 18-19. Now in this total 4 years, I'm going to calculate my total stay in India. If it is coming to 365 days or more, I would say my B part has been satisfied. If not, then I would say B part is not satisfied. If both A and B are satisfied, then we can say my basic condition 2 is fulfilled. If any one of this is not satisfied, then we cannot say that point number 2 is fulfilled. In short, you need to remember A and B both should be fulfilled. So I have written over here and. I hope I am clear with your basic conditions. Now there is one exception that I have mentioned on the last point. Replace 60 days with 182 days in condition 2. That is, in condition 2, point number A, I have written here. What is the criteria? 60 days. Now I have to replace this 60 days by 182 days in a certain scenario. There are two scenarios which are written over here. So what we are studying now? We are studying exception to this particular condition, that I need to change and replace 60 days by 182 days. When if Indian citizen or person of Indian origin, that is, this is applicable in the case of Indian citizen or any person who is from Indian origin. He leaves India for the purpose of employment or self-employment outside India. So basically, if the case is such that I was a resident of India, that is, I was an Indian citizen, but now I'm moving to USA. Why? Either for employment, that is to take any job, or to do my own business in USA. What is the scenario over here? I am leaving India, fine, but there is a particular purpose. What is my purpose? For employment or self-employment outside India. So if it is stated, the purpose is stated, and if the person was Indian citizen or person of Indian origin, then at the time of calculation of residential status, in point number 2A, we are going to replace 60 days with 182 days. So you are just likely to remember one thing. What we need to do is we need to change only one thing. In this point, instead of 60 days, I am going to write 182 days. When? First is when I'm leaving India for the purpose of employment or self-employment. Second is who is engaged outside India comes on visit to India. So if there is any person who is of Indian citizen or a person of Indian origin, he is already employed outside India. So he is having a business outside India, or he is doing job outside India. He is coming to India only for the purpose of visiting to India. So if this purpose is mentioned, then what we are going to do? We are going to replace this 60 days with 182 days. So this is just an exception that you need to remember separately. In all the other cases, we need to follow this particular table. I hope I am clear with this particular slide. Friends, we are going to start with the sum on this particular topic itself in our next lecture. So till then, I, CA Pujan Kapadia, thank you all for your patient listening and would like to see you soon in my upcoming lecture. And friends, I would like to request you to please learn this particular slide so that when we do sums in our next lecture, it is much more clearer to you. Thank you, friends.